Story 1. The Place That Still Had Room. You're listening to Silas Crow, Dark Pages. I used to believe the worst thing that could happen to a person was dying alone. Turns out, it's realizing you don't belong among the living anymore. When I woke up in the hospital bed, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. No footsteps, no machines, no voices through the walls. I tried to call out, but my throat was dry and weak. When I finally sat up, I saw my own name taped to the foot of the bed with a black ribbon tied around it. I thought it was a mistake. Mistakes happen in hospitals. I stood, shaky, and walked into the hallway. Every room I passed was dark. At the end of the hall, a television flickered in the waiting area, playing a news segment about a man who had died unexpectedly after complications from surgery. They showed my photo. I watched myself described in the past tense. I ran outside barefoot into the cold night and made it home by memory alone. When I reached my apartment, the lock had been changed. Through the window, I saw my brother sitting at the table with my landlord, papers spread out, dividing things up. My things, my life. I knocked. No one answered. I pounded until my hands hurt. A neighbor finally came out and screamed when she saw me. She called the police. They didn't listen to what I said. They asked me whose name I was using. They told me I was sick. I learned quickly that proving you exist is harder than dying. Every place I went, I was turned away. Shelters said I looked too well. Hospitals said I was already discharged. My name belonged to someone else now. After 3 nights in the cold, I found an old building slated for demolition. Inside, there were rows of unused beds left from when it had been a hospice. I lay down in one. It felt familiar, safe. No one questioned me there. No one asked who I was. And when I closed my eyes, I realized the building wasn't abandoned at all. It was full of people who had nowhere else to go. Story 2. He never came back out. My father worked underground for most of his life. Mines, tunnels, maintenance shafts. Places where the sun didn't reach and time didn't matter. He used to say, the ground remembers the people inside it, that if you stayed long enough, it wouldn't let you go. We laughed at that when we were kids. The day he collapsed at work, they said it was exhaustion, heat, stress. They brought him up unconscious, covered in dust, and pronounced him dead before the ambulance even arrived. The funeral was fast, cheaper that way. I couldn't stand to watch them lower him. Something felt unfinished. 3 nights later, I dreamed he was knocking from below. Not screaming, just knocking. Slow, patient. When I woke, the sound was still in my ears. I went to the mine against orders. They hadn't sealed his section yet. I climbed down alone. The deeper I went, the warmer it became. The tunnel lights flickered. I found his helmet first, then his tools laid neatly against the wall. He was sitting where they'd found him, back against the rock, eyes open, breathing. He looked relieved. He told me they'd made a mistake bringing him up, that the ground had already started to close around him, had already begun keeping him. He said the knocking wasn't for help. It was to say goodbye. I begged him to come back with me. He shook his head and placed my hand on the wall. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. He smiled and told me I should leave before it noticed me too. I climbed out shaking. They sealed the tunnel the next morning. Sometimes, late at night, I hear knocking beneath my house. Not asking to be let out, just reminding me where he is. Story 3. The coffin they left open. They said it was a kindness, leaving the lid unlatched, just in case, the mortician whispered, like it was a superstition instead of fear. I remember none of the service, only waking afterward to the smell of flowers rotting in warm air. My eyes opened to darkness, but not tight darkness. I could move my arms. I could breathe. That confused me more than terror ever could. I pushed the lid, and it shifted easily. The realization came slowly. I had been buried with an escape. I climbed out into the vault, shaking, laughing hysterically, convinced I had beaten the worst fate imaginable. Outside, the world had moved on. My house was sold, my accounts closed, my obituary archived. My face belonged to a memory. I tried to reclaim my life and failed again and again. No one wants proof a miracle inconveniences them. One night, exhausted and freezing, I returned to the cemetery. The vault door was unlocked. The coffin waited. I sat on its edge for a long time, thinking. No questions, no arguments, no disbelief, just rest. I lay down again and pulled the lid halfway closed, just enough to keep the cold out. I told myself I would rest for a moment. The warmth returned, the silence accepted me, and this time I didn't try to leave. Story 4. The last cup he ever served. I worked the night shift at a coffee shop that never officially closed. It was one of those places that stayed open because no one cared enough to lock the door. Truckers, insomniacs, people who didn't want to go home yet. That kind of crowd. I learned early that coffee isn't really about caffeine. It's about permission. Permission to sit somewhere warm. Permission to exist a little longer. One night, a man came in just before dawn. He looked exhausted in a way sleep wouldn't fix. He ordered black coffee, nothing else, and asked me how long I'd been working there. When I told him, he smiled sadly and said that was longer than most people lasted anywhere. He came back every night after that. Same order, same seat. Always watched me make the coffee, like it mattered. One morning, while refilling his cup, I noticed his reflection didn't move with him in the glass behind the counter. I blinked and it corrected itself. I told myself it was fatigue. He started asking stranger questions, whether I ever felt replaceable, whether I thought anyone would notice if I stopped showing up. One night, he told me this was his last cup. I laughed. He didn't. When I opened the shop the next evening, the man was sitting behind the counter wearing my apron. My name was stitched onto it. He poured me a cup of coffee and told me not to worry. He said the shop always needs someone. I realized then that I couldn't remember leaving. I couldn't remember my life before the counter. And the coffee never gets cold. Story 5. The tailor who fixed people. I was a tailor for 30 years. Not fashion, repairs, alterations, making things fit again. People brought me suits for weddings, coats for funerals, uniforms for jobs they hoped would last. Over time, I noticed how much people hated their bodies, how they wanted hiding places stitched into fabric, extra room here, less there. One day, an old man asked me to take in his coat. When I measured him, my hands sank too easily into his shoulders, like the stuffing had shifted. He smiled and asked if I ever thought people could be altered the way clothes could. After that, my work started changing. Seams moved where I didn't remember sewing them. Customers returned, saying their clothes felt too tight around the chest, like something inside them had grown. I started dreaming of needles pulling skin instead of cloth. One night, after closing, I tried on a jacket I'd just finished. It fit perfectly, too perfectly. I felt pressure, not on my body, but inside it. Something adjusting, something correcting flaws I'd never noticed. In the mirror, my posture was straighter, my face calmer, empty. The shop felt pleased. When the morning customers arrived, they thanked me for the work I hadn't remembered doing. They said I had finally made them feel right. I don't take measurements anymore. I already know where to cut. Story 6. He kept the building clean. I cleaned an office building after everyone went home. 30 floors of glass, desks, and abandoned coffee cups. No one learned my name. That was fine. Being invisible makes some jobs easier. Over time, I noticed certain offices stayed dirty, no matter how often I cleaned them. Smudges returned. Papers rearranged themselves. Chairs angled just slightly toward the door. One night, I heard typing on a floor that was supposed to be empty. I followed the sound to a cubicle with no nameplate. Inside, a man sat at a computer typing documents labeled with dates that hadn't happened yet. He told me he was finishing reports for people who no longer needed them, that the building remembered everyone who worked there too long. After that, I started seeing my own name appear on documents, performance reviews, exit forms, obituaries written in corporate language. One night, I tried to leave early. The elevator wouldn't respond. The stairs led back to the same floor. The man was waiting, holding a badge with my photo on it. He said the building needed someone to maintain it from the inside now. I looked at the windows and saw the city lights far below, unreachable. I took the badge. The floors have never been cleaner, and no one asks where the janitor went. Story 7. The night shift never ends. I took the night shift because it let me disappear without anyone noticing. Days were full of eyes, questions, expectations. Nights were honest. The factory didn't pretend to care who you were, only whether you kept things running. It sat beyond the edge of town, where the street lights thinned out and the road turned rough. A low concrete sprawl humming quietly, even from the parking lot. Inside, the air always smelled faintly metallic, like hot dust and oil baked into the walls. My job was simple. Watch the machines, record output, reset anything that stalled. No one explained what the parts were for. They said it didn't matter. Around 3 a.m, the same machine slowed every night. Not stopped, slowed, like it was thinking. The gauges dipped just enough to notice, never enough to trigger alarms. I logged it. Maintenance never came. After a few weeks, I realized the cameras didn't show that section of the floor, just gray static, like fog trapped inside the lens. When I asked, the supervisor told me that corner had always been temperamental. He didn't look at me when he said it. That was when I started hearing footsteps behind me. Slow, careful steps, never rushed, always stopping when I stopped. When I turned, there was nothing there, but the air felt disturbed, like something had just passed through it. One night, the machine stopped completely. The lights dimmed, not out, just lower, like the building was holding its breath. I felt warmth at my back and heard my own voice whisper that it was time. I don't remember leaving. I remember coming back the next night. Someone else was sitting at my station, wearing my jacket, writing in my handwriting. My name was scratched off the schedule. The supervisor said my contract had ended and thanked me for my service. I asked who replaced me. He looked toward the machine and said it had learned enough. I walked out, but the doors didn't lock behind me. Sometimes I return at night. The guards never see me. The machine hums when I stand near it, like recognition. Some shifts don't end. They just change where you stand. Story 8. The Apartment with No Mirrors. The apartment was cheap because it had no mirrors. That was the explanation, delivered with a shrug by a landlord who didn't like eye contact. Every reflective surface had been removed or painted over. Bathroom, bedroom, even polished metal fixtures dulled on purpose. I told myself it was quirky, eccentric, nothing more. The first month was peaceful, too peaceful. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, waking with a dry mouth and a strange sense of being watched, without fear. I noticed I stopped shaving as often, stopped checking my hair. I touched my face more, as if confirming it was still there. Some mornings I found faint marks on my neck, small and neat, like pinpricks. I blamed stress. Neighbors avoided me. One finally warned me not to stay too long. She said people changed in that apartment, became quieter, hungrier. I laughed it off. Then I woke one night to breathing that wasn't mine, slow and patient, inches from my face. Something cold brushed my lips, lingered, withdrew. In the morning, my skin looked paler, stretched tighter over my bones. Food stopped tasting right. Warmth felt better. People felt warmer. When I finally saw my reflection by accident in a dark store window, I understood why mirrors were removed. My eyes didn't reflect light anymore. They absorbed it. The landlord smiled when I told him I was staying. He said the apartment prefers tenants who stop asking questions. I haven't looked at myself since. I don't need to. Story 9. The Blood Taste in the Rain. Night road maintenance teaches you how empty the world really is. Highways without cars feel like something unfinished. We worked in rain and fog, fixing damage before anyone noticed it existed. One night, in a stretch of road no one liked stopping on, we found a man standing barefoot on the asphalt, pale, still, rain sliding off him without soaking his clothes. He asked for help in a voice that sounded unused. When one of the crew offered him a jacket, he recoiled like it burned. That night, the rain tasted metallic, like blood on the tongue. Over the following weeks, people vanished near that road. Animals, too. We found drag marks leading into the trees. I saw the man again, closer each time. His smile never changed, but his mouth seemed fuller, redder. His teeth were wrong, too many, too thin. He told me rain hides hunger, that it feeds what walks when no one is looking. He asked if I was tired. I was exhausted. He said exhaustion opens people up. When the crew found me at dawn, I was standing in the rain, smiling, soaked through. I didn't feel cold anymore. I don't blink when it rains. Neither does the thing that walks with me, waiting for storms. Story 10. The Funeral Home Across the Street. I lived across from a funeral home long enough to notice patterns. At first it was small things, the kind you dismiss because they feel rude to think about. Every time someone moved out of my apartment building, there seemed to be a service across the street not long after. A coincidence, I told myself. Cities are full of them. But then I started recognizing details. A lamp in the visitation room that looked exactly like the one from 3B. A rug I remembered helping carry up the stairs for the woman in 2A. Once I saw a chair I was certain had come from the apartment directly below mine. The leg still scratched where it caught on the elevator door. I stopped looking out the window after that. Still, I couldn't stop noticing. The funeral home never looked busy from the outside, but it was never quiet either. Lights were always on in at least one room. Cars arrived at strange hours. People came and went without the usual noise of grief. No loud crying, no arguments, just quiet conversations and soft footsteps. One night, the funeral director knocked on my door. He introduced himself politely and said he liked to meet the neighbors. His voice was calm, practiced, the kind people trust without knowing why. He asked if I'd like to see the place sometime. I don't know why I said yes. Curiosity, maybe, or the sense that refusing wouldn't change anything. Inside, the building was warmer than I expected, comfortable. The rooms were clean, orderly, and strangely familiar. Then I noticed the doors. They weren't marked with names. They were marked with apartment numbers. 1A, 2B, 3C. When I asked about it, the director smiled and said it made things simpler. He showed me a room labeled with my apartment number. It was empty, prepared. He told me not to worry. Everything was already arranged. When I asked when my service would be, he said it had been scheduled for some time now. I woke up the next morning feeling calm, finished, like there was nothing left to prove. Across the street, the lights were on. Cars were arriving. People dressed in black gathered quietly. I stayed inside. It felt rude to interrupt. They said kind things about me, I'm sure. Thank you for listening. This has been Silas Crow, Dark Pages. Some stories don't end when the lights come back on.